It starts with a smile, a polite, confident, charming smile. The kind that makes you feel safe, even flattered. But behind that smile lies something that no one can truly comprehend. A hunger so cold, so calculating, that it defies all logic and humanity. He wasn't the monster people expected. No drooling beast, no shadowed figure hiding under the bed. He was handsome, articulate, a law student, a friend, and yet he was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. This is the story of Ted Bundy, the man who taught the world that monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they walk beside us, perfectly disguised. The 1970s, a decade of social change, freedom, and rebellion. America was moving fast, cities growing, universities alive with new ideas. But amid that optimism, a different story was unfolding, one of fear, confusion, and the dawning realization that pure evil could be ordinary. Across the western United States, women began disappearing, college students, secretaries, young dreamers, all taken in the blink of an eye. No witnesses, no traces, just vanished. Police departments were baffled, the public was terrified, and through it all, one man, calm, polite, intelligent, was there, smiling, pretending to help find the killer when he was the killer. Ted Bundy didn't just kill his victims, he controlled them. He controlled their trust, their fear, and even after death, their stories. This is not just a crime story. This is a descent into charm, deception, and the darkness of a man who fooled everyone. Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His story began with lies. His mother, Louise, was unmarried. A scandal in 1940s America. To protect her reputation, her parents raised Ted as their own son, pretending Louise was his sister. He grew up under a false identity, surrounded by secrecy. Even as a child, Ted was different, quiet, distant, but always observing. He didn't fit in, yet he craved attention. Neighbors described him as polite, well-mannered, but oddly detached. He was intelligent, curious, and early on fascinated by control. He once surrounded a young cousin with knives as she slept, smiling when she woke up in terror. As he grew older, Ted's dual nature intensified. He was ambitious, studied psychology at the University of Washington, volunteered for political campaigns, even helped a suicide hotline center. Ironically, he once worked beside Ann Rule, a crime writer who would later write one of the most chilling books about him. He was charismatic. He could mimic empathy perfectly, but it was an act. Underneath, he felt hollow, unseen, unloved, and most of all, rejected. In his early 20s, Ted fell in love with a woman named Stephanie Brooks. Elegant, wealthy, everything he wished he was. When she left him, it shattered him. She represented everything he couldn't control: love, rejection, power. Years later, when he began killing, many of his victims looked exactly like Stephanie. Long straight hair, parted in the middle, soft-spoken, kind. It wasn't coincidence. It was revenge. Twisted, obsessive revenge on a world that made him feel inferior. The first known disappearances began in 1974 in Seattle, Washington. It started small. A woman vanishes on her way home from class, another from her apartment, then another. At first, the police didn't see the pattern, but the fear was spreading. The victims were all young women, college age, attractive, and shared eerily similar features. Bundy had a type, and he hunted methodically. He often wore a fake arm cast or leg brace, pretending to struggle with heavy books or a load of packages. He'd ask for help loading his car, a tan Volkswagen Beetle. Once the victim leaned in, the trap was sprung. Inside that small car, he had removed the passenger seat. The door handle had been altered so it couldn't open from the inside. The car, cute, harmless, small, became a coffin on wheels. He struck repeatedly. January 1974, Linda Ann Healy vanished from her bed. March, Donna Manson disappeared walking across campus. April, Susan Rancourt, gone after a night lecture. May, Roberta Parks, missing from Oregon State. June, Brenda Ball vanished after a night out. And then July 14, 1974, Lake Sammamish State Park. It was a sunny day, hundreds of people out enjoying the summer. Two women, Janice Ott and Denise Nasland, disappeared within hours of each other. Witnesses described a man with a sling, polite, confident, calling himself Ted. For the first time, the mask cracked. Police now had a name and a description, but by then, Ted Bundy had already moved on. He left Washington and crossed into Utah, where the pattern resumed. Deborah Kent, Melissa Smith, Laura Aim, all gone, all taken by the same predator, who blended effortlessly into society. The terror followed him like a shadow. Across Colorado, Idaho, and Utah, his trail of death grew longer. Bundy didn't just kill, he planned, studied, and adapted. He revisited his crime scenes, sometimes days later, as if reliving the moment. Some of his victims' remains were found mutilated, others never found at all. He once said he didn't feel guilt, only emptiness when the possession ended. He wanted control over life and death itself. By 1975, Ted Bundy had murdered more than 24 women, and yet he still wasn't satisfied. Law enforcement across several states was scrambling. Different police departments had pieces of the puzzle, but no one could see the whole picture. There was no national database, no way to share evidence quickly. Witnesses remembered his face, his name, even his car, yet the dots remained disconnected. Then in August 1975, a Utah patrol officer noticed a suspicious vehicle prowling near houses at night. It was a tan Volkswagen Beetle. Inside, he found masks, handcuffs, rope, and a crowbar. Bundy was arrested, but for burglary tools, not murder. Still, detectives began connecting the evidence. They searched his apartment, found maps, photos of women, and a chilling familiarity to unsolved cases. For a moment it seemed the nightmare was over, but Bundy was confident, too confident. He charmed investigators, smiled in court, played the victim of a misunderstanding. He even studied law books, preparing to defend himself. And then, he escaped. In June 1977, during a hearing in Aspen, Colorado, Bundy jumped out of a second-story courthouse window and fled into the woods. He survived for 6 days before being caught. Months later, he escaped again, slipping through a ceiling vent in his cell and walking right out of the jailhouse. This time, he didn't look back. He drove to Florida, free, nameless, and bloodthirsty. On January 15, 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. In minutes, he bludgeoned and strangled 2 women to death, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, and attacked 2 others, leaving them barely alive. But Bundy wasn't done. He abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. Weeks later, his rampage was impulsive, chaotic, the mind of a killer losing control. The same intelligence that once made him cunning was now unraveling, and it would be his downfall. In February 1978, Bundy's stolen car was spotted by police in Pensacola, Florida. After a brief struggle, he was arrested. When officers asked his name, he smiled and said, "I'd rather not say." At the station, they realized who he was. The infamous killer the entire country had been hunting, caught by a routine traffic stop. His trial became a media circus. For the first time in American history, cameras were allowed in a courtroom. Ted Bundy, the once anonymous monster, now performed for millions. He smiled, joked, and even proposed to his girlfriend Carol Ann Boone. In court, she accepted. In front of the jury, the contrast was surreal. A man on trial for brutal murders, acting like a movie star. Some women in the audience sent him fan letters, convinced of his innocence. Others, victims' families, stared in disbelief. But behind the charm, Bundy was breaking. Evidence was piling up. Bite marks, eyewitnesses, and physical traces. The illusion of control was slipping away. In 1979, Ted Bundy was found guilty of the Chi Omega murders and sentenced to death. 2 years later, he received a second death sentence for the murder of Kimberly Leach. For nearly a decade, Bundy fought his fate. He gave interviews, toyed with investigators, and even used his knowledge of psychology to manipulate anyone who visited him. But time was running out. In his final days, Bundy began confessing, not out of remorse, but to delay his execution. He confessed to over 30 murders, across 7 states. He gave details so cold, so clinical, that even seasoned detectives couldn't sleep. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Outside the prison, crowds gathered, cheering, holding signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn." The monster was dead, but his legacy, the horror, the manipulation, the questions, still lingered. Ted Bundy wasn't just a serial killer. He was a mirror, reflecting how fragile trust can be, how easily evil wears the face of good. He forced the world to see that killers don't always look like monsters. Sometimes, they look like friends. Sometimes, they look like us. He was proof that evil can be intelligent, educated, charming, and that those qualities make it even more dangerous. Even in death, Bundy continues to fascinate. Movies, books, documentaries, all trying to understand why. But perhaps the answer isn't in psychology, but in humanity itself. We are drawn to Bundy because he represents our greatest fear, that monsters don't come from the dark. They come from within. Ted Bundy was not supernatural, he was painfully human, and that's what makes his story truly terrifying. Because at the end of it all, he taught us a lesson the world will never forget. The most dangerous monsters are the ones who smile.